Hello MMA fans and welcome back to MMA Crypt's Fighting Talk. For today's show, I'll be going one-on-one with MMA Legend, Mr Frank Shamrock. We'll be discussing Frank's classic bout with Phil Baroni back in 2007. That bout was held under the Elite XC/Strikeforce co-promotion banner. But before we get to all that, welcome to the show, Frank, and thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me.
Okay, to kick off the show, Frank, I'd like to ask, how did the fight between you and Phil Baroni come to be? Apparently this fight had been on the cards for a while now, before the actual fight took place. Is that true, Frank?
Yeah, gosh, how did that come about? It was actually, I think, Josh Thompson who kind of got that going for us. I had just fought Caesar Gracie, and that whole thing had sort of originated on the internet. You know, I was on vacation in Hawaii, and then Caesar sort of challenged me on the internet. I'd never even heard of him, but he had the Gracie, so it sounded great. And then, Josh Thompson, who was a young guy at the time, sort of saw this thing develop and progress, and then saw an opportunity, I think, to maybe try the same thing. And so he started picking on me on the internet. And his roommate just happened to be Phil Baroni at the time. And Phil also got into the mix and started, talking smack on the internet. And Josh was always too small to fight. I never really liked him that much or appreciated his character. But I really liked Phil and always liked his character. So when Phil got into it, I was like, yeah, I like, this is something we could do. I liked Phil. And at the time I was sort of, transitioning between fighter and promoter and branding guy. And it all just made sense. I liked what Phil stood for. And then, when I watched him fight and I researched his style, he was very exciting, stylistically. And I just, it just made sense after a while.
There was a scheduled bout between you and Phil Baroni in late 2006. That bout fell through. Could you tell us what happened there, please, Frank?
Well, I mean, I know what happened from my end, which was I was advised that, he wasn't going to be able to pass the blood test for various reasons on the date we had selected for the commission we had originally selected. So it just fell apart, basically, and that's what I was told. Who knows? But that's what I was told. And, it just... it was unfortunate about the timing, but that was around the same time that Strikeforce continued to grow as a brand, and then YouTube really was becoming sort of a backbone tool to helping MMA promote itself. So that gave me a lot of time just to make funny videos of him and really pick on him and really really get him angry and mad and extend that storyline. So while it was unfortunate, it gave me another layer, another opportunity to build the fight.
I'd like to move on to some pre-fight comments before we get into the actual fight with Phil Baroni. In a pre-fight interview before your fight with Phil Baroni, Phil mentioned that you are going to, quote, kick him like a fucking girl, and he is going to punch you in the fucking face. As always, the pre-fight entertainment from Phil Baroni.
Yeah.
Did a lot of his comments there make you laugh, Frank? More than, say, made you angry?
Yeah, I mean, I knew Phil and kind of had watched him come up and stuff, so I knew he was just, a nice guy, nice guy. He was just a regular guy from the East Coast. So yeah, I never took anything he said personally. I liked his character because, most of these guys, I more than not have to be the bad guy because no one else wants to be the bad guy, and no one else sees the value of the story. But Phil was very comfortable being that guy, and I liked it, and it gave me an opportunity to be even more creative with Phil.
Yeah.
And I think my best line before that fight was when I was doing my what was it? The night before the fight, and we do the press conference thing. And Phil's all, oh, you've been hand-picking opponents all these years, and, this and that and that. And I turned to him and I go, Phil, you are the hand-picked opponent. And he
Oh,
just,
did he?
you could just see his mind just went, and it just started to crack a little bit. And
How did he take that one there, Frank?
yeah. He did not take that one well. But, by then it had been months and months and months of me picking on him and, finding creative ways to keep him angry and, excited and not relaxed.
Well, Phil's sort of that way with all his opponents. He's doing it now with Ben Askren. Ben Askren's come out, sort of did a few, tweets to him. That's turned into something there. Obviously, he's injured at the minute, or rehabbing from an injury, so we'll see how that one pans out. Okay, back onto your fight, Phil Baroni. Phil also tried mocking your punching power pre-fight, claiming that you can't hurt him, and he will hurt you if you go punch for punch with him. Now, you actually did go punch for punch with Phil Baroni, and smiled while doing it. You also dropped Phil in the fight, so did you go punch for punch with Phil on purpose, just to prove a point due to the things he was saying pre-fight?
No, not at all. I had actually blown my knee out. I had no intention of standing up with Phil, only to, close a distance and fight him in the clinch and wear him out, and then, put him asleep with a submission or, some type of inside striking. But I went to Dan Henderson's camp to train for the first time I'd ever left my camp and went outside of my camp. I went to Dan's, and I was wrestling, and the judo guy gave me like this judo leg chop and threw me down, and it just tore all the tendons out of my knee. So I couldn't squat. I couldn't take a bended knee, up until about, 2 or 3 days before the fight.
Phil Baroni at that time, he was working at Xtreme Couture. Did you maybe get a little info there, inside information from Dan Henderson?
Nah. It was more, I went there just because I was old and I was getting lazy, and, I knew for that fight, in my heart of hearts, I knew he couldn't beat me technically. But I also knew, I was at a point in my life where I didn't want to train that hard. And, unless I was outside of my comfort zone and unless I was outside of my circle, I wasn't going to push myself hard. And I didn't want to be that guy. I didn't want Phil Baroni to beat me up or knock me out. That would have been the worst thing ever. So, so I made a drastic change, and I went to Dan's, really just to shift the gear. I took Maurice Smith with me, and I planned a whole camp there. And I got hurt on the first day, and I spent the whole camp laying on my back and swimming in a pool with my legs tied together, and just completely, making it a battle of, psychology and picking apart his striking style, because I knew I couldn't take him down, and I didn't have the structure to do much kicking. I knew I had to box.
Sorry, Frank. I was getting images of you as the Little Mermaid there with your legs tied together swimming.
Yeah, it's so true, because I couldn't kick my leg. My legs were separated. They hurt. So, but I had to keep some type of vascular conditioning. I was 2 weeks out of one of the biggest fights ever. And, the fight before that was the Gracie fight, and I got disqualified. So, I was always the good guy, and then suddenly I was the bad guy, and people didn't know how to take that. So when it came time to fight Phil, it was very important that I showed up, and I fought. And even though I was hurt, I was still planning on showing up. It was never a question to me, because I knew what had to be done for my name. And we would tie my legs together, and then Maurice Smith would get a pole, and then on my legs there would be a bungee, and I would swim against the bungee, and then he would hit me with the pole after a certain time session, and that was my vascular training, because there was nothing else I could do.
Back onto the fight. Phil actually shot for a desperate takedown near the end of the fight with you. Was that more of a moral victory for you there, Frank, when he did that? Because he was talking so much beforehand, you won't stand with him, and if you did, you're going to get knocked out.
Yeah, I mean, it was part of it. I could tell I was hitting him. I've never hit anybody as hard as I've hit Phil Baroni that many times, ever. Any fight ever. And I could tell I was hitting him, and I could tell I was hurting him, but he wasn't going anywhere. He has amazing resilience, and he can take incredible amounts of damage. And my problem was I was getting tired hitting him. Like I was, my gas tank was just emptying so quickly because of the injury, and because of my inability to complete my camp. So he was hitting me really hard, and harder than anybody else has ever hit me, except for my brother. But when he took me down, I kind of thought that might have been the moment.
How hard does Phil Baroni actually punch?
He hits hard, but it's a different type of hard. He hits like, he hits like Ken hits, like a big clubbing punch. Like he's punching through your head. It's not that brain rattling, punch that a boxer gives you. It's like a kind of a club. And it hurts. It hurts more than it confuses you and, turns your brain off. It more of like hurt. You're like, ow, this guy just clubbed me. That's what it feels like.
I want to move on to some injury rumours. Obviously, we touched upon your injuries a minute ago. Phil Baroni actually tore his groin, so I believe, in the fight.
Yeah.
Did you ever watch the post-fight interview with Bill Goldberg where he whipped out his penis?
I did. I think it was a viral video there for a minute. A short one.
Would you care to give us your thoughts on that, please, Frank?
I have been in the post-battle, locker room situation, and it's a very much share all, scenario. I've never seen the injury or had the injury, so I can only imagine what it looks like and feels like, and I just think both of them are probably terrible.
Okay, on to the fight itself, Frank. As both you and Phil went to the centre of the cage to receive your instructions from referee, Mr. Steve Mazzagatti, you and Phil sort of were grinning at one another. If you can recall, could you tell me what you were thinking as you were face to face with Phil Baroni, with only the referee between you?
Yeah, well, I when I got in, honestly, I was really nervous about the knee thing. I was really nervous, and probably it's the only time I've ever sat my family down and talked to them. And I was like, look, this might come out really bad, and I might get really messed up. But everything's taken care of, and don't worry about it. And if worst comes to worst, this is the reason why. So I actually had that talk with my family, which I've never had. So walking into the arena, I was really nervous, but I felt like I could do it, and that's something that I think a lot of people lose. I felt like I could do it. When we got in the ring, when we got in the cage and started moving, and I looked over, Phil was as nervous as I was or more, and he started looking at me for, to try to be angry and tough. But what he did instead was get in the rhythm of my body. I started moving side to side. He got in the exact same rhythm. He was following me around. That's when I knew I was going to beat him.
Did you have a desperation plan just in case your knee gave out? Practice a certain kick from the bottom or something?
No, there was no desperation plan. I was going to get knocked the hell out. I was going to get beat down in a very ugly fashion if my knee gave out.
There seemed to be some hesitation in the glove touching with Phil Baroni. Did you plan on touching gloves with Phil Baroni prior to the fight?
I didn't, because I didn't think he would expect me to. So I didn't, and I thought it would be tougher if I didn't.
Yeah, it looked like the referee sort of forced the issue. Do you think if the referee didn't, you and Phil would not have touched gloves? Because you're not really serious.
I wouldn't have touched gloves if the referee hadn't have kind of got us going. Yeah, because I was, my whole thing was to stay in Phil's head and to keep this psychological game going.
About a minute into the fight, you began motioning, going to sleep sound with your hands and telling Phil Baroni something. Tell us there, Frank. Was you telling Phil Baroni that you're going to put him to sleep there?
Yeah, and it just came out. It came out of nowhere. Once I got in the cage and I saw that he didn't know what to do, so he matched my rhythm. And then we started dancing and, doing, I could tell he was waiting for me to move before he would move. So it's almost as if I was pulling the strings. I was hitting him literally so hard. It was just, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe he's still standing there. Every shot was landing. So then I knew I should ratchet it up. I should start messing with his brain, and try to distract him a little bit, so I could try to knock him out. And then that's where that sleeper thing, all that stuff just came out of nowhere. I have no idea what I was thinking. It seemed like, wow, I got Phil psychologically on the ropes, and I should try to finish him by doing something that he'll just be like, why is he doing this? That's what I did.
There'll be a lot of people who will call that showboating, but you're one of the very few fighters that I think has fun in the cage. You just look like you're having fun in there. You get into the fight, you enjoy the fight, and that's why you do some of the things you do. Would you
Yeah,
say that too, Frank?
yeah, 100%. I mean, it's either I'm desperate because it's either complete desperation, I don't know what to do, or I'm having the time of my life. And at that time, um, I was having the time of my life because I knew for at least 5 or 6 minutes I could do this. Past that, it was questionable.
Well, strangely enough, literally 10 seconds after you motioned to Phil that you're going to put him to sleep, you actually dropped him with a three-punch combo. Did you think he was finished once you knocked him down there, Frank?
100%. That's like what happens in my dreams when all this stuff lines up. And yeah, it was all he was supposed to fall. That's how Tito was supposed to fall. That one didn't happen either. But yeah, I thought he was going down. And weirdly enough, my whole body like relaxed because I was under so much tension because I thought, oh my God, my knee's going to give out. I was like, ah. And then I was like, oh no, he's coming back to life.
Is that why you switched to the ground and pound there, Frank? Because
Yeah,
you let go of the choke and just started pounding on him.
yeah, I honestly didn't know what to do because I thought, oh my God, I've never hit anybody that hard in my life. I mean, I punched right through his head. And then I was like, oh, he's done. Because anybody else I've even hit with, 70% of that power hasn't gotten up. And he got right up, or sort of got up. So, yeah, I got a little desperate. That's why I was hitting him in the back of the head. I just didn't even know what I was just like, oh my God, he's coming alive.
The fight continued, and Phil managed to survive the choke. Steve stood you up and took away 1 point from you there, Frank, for 2 punches to the back of the head of Phil Baroni. What was your thoughts on Steve taking away a point from you there, Frank?
It sucked. I knew I just did it. I knew I was doing it, and I couldn't stop myself because I thought he was done. So I was just hitting him, and I really wasn't paying attention.
Did
Yeah.
you see? I was sort of shocked. Normally at least they give you a warning first. He did the same thing with Brock Lesnar, Steve Mazzagatti. So did you sort of know beforehand that he's sort of a tough referee? He doesn't really let a lot of stuff go.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I've known Steve for a long time, but it's fair. I hit him twice in the back of the head. I mean, and then I had just come off a fight where I got disqualified for kneeing someone in the back of the head. So I mean, I totally see where they're like, yeah, that's a little suspect there. And I wasn't conscious of it. I was just like, he's coming alive. I better try to kill him again.
I noticed you seem to use your knees a lot in the bout with Phil Baroni. You started clinching up and throwing knees to his chest and try to catch him on the chin. That in turn allowed Phil Baroni to take you down with ease. Did you not mind being on the ground against Phil Baroni, being on your back?
Yeah, I mean, not at all. That's where, I excel. And I know, Phil's real ground game is limited. He's got a good grounded pound, but his understanding of the ground game is very limited. So, yeah, and that was my strategy for him in the beginning was to box my way on the inside, grab up on his head, knee him through his center, and then when he takes me down, flow for holds, because basically that would be a game where I wouldn't get hurt. And yeah, I mean, he hit me in the body a few times, pretty good, but it allowed me to knee him and allowed him to move me pretty much wherever he wanted to move me.
Well, there was a couple of positions in the fight where you was actually ground and pounding Phil against the cage. Also, there was some good scrambles that you managed to come out in a good position from. Now, I know you train a lot of gymnastics there, Frank. That really help you to move your hips and change positions so well in a fight. Phil is sort of the more power training guy. He likes to lift the weights. He likes to do the wrestling and the heavy bags, etc. Maybe gymnastics might have been a little bit too feminine for him. Do you think you sort of teached Phil Baroni a lesson and how useful gymnastics can be in a fight there, Frank?
Well, I mean, I hope he took that lesson and ran away with it. I mean, I could feel it. I mean, you could feel every movement he was making because he's all power. Learning to move my body and learning, basically how to move it, when to move it, and how to move it efficiently has been one of the keys to me being very successful in martial arts and especially combat sports. So, yeah, I hope he learned the lesson. I'd give it to him again, but I'm too old now. I might be able to cartwheel over him, but that's about it. On the way out.
Jump out the cage.
Yeah.
The commentary team during the fight with Phil kept mentioning how Phil was stationary and not moving around so much. I noticed you wasn't excessive with your leg kicks on Phil, but with nearly every combination or counter you threw, you seemed to land a good few clean kicks to the legs of Phil Baroni. Do you believe it was your leg kicks that slowed Phil down in the fight, or do you think it was more to do with his groin injury?
I think it was the damage. I think it was the damage. One of the things that, and as I look back at seeing Phil's fights, Phil can take enormous damage, and he doesn't show it. He just walks right through it like it doesn't exist. But it takes a tremendous toll on your energy level. I mean, it just zaps you. It's like, you get kind of zombified. And I think that's what was happening to Phil. I never stopped damaging him. And when I was hitting him in the chin, I was literally socking him right in the chin, as hard as I could. And then when he was blocking those, I was kicking him in the leg. So I just think it was, the first 4 minutes of that fight, I was just traumatizing him. Poor guy. And landing well. And every step, I was throwing a punch. And every time I was reacting, he was tensing up and waiting and letting me hit him first. And it was just, he was a punching bag for a little while.
That fight was scheduled for 5 rounds. You and Phil Baroni came out like it was a 1-round fight. Did you visualise that your fight with Phil Baroni was never going to the judges' scorecards there, Frank?
Well, I mean, there is never a fight that I take to a scorecard. There's every fight I have a solution for. There's a finish, and I have I've done it a million times. And for the Phil fight, I knew exactly how to beat him. It's just after I hurt my knee, it became questionable whether I could do it, at all. Just, mechanically, I just ran out of, options. But, I believe that I still could. And I just had, probably 7 or 8 minutes. If I hadn't choked Phil out with that last choke, he would have, smashed me. Because I didn't have any more energy. That was it. That was the end of it. So, I mean, I think that's the hardest thing for people. That's what I took away from this fight is, I went in there knowing that, wow, this is probably impossible. And odds are I'm going to get horribly knocked out and this is the end. That's how I went into the fight because that's all that was there. My preparation and my mindset said otherwise, but the facts said that.
Yeah, apparently I think Phil Baroni was the favourite going into that fight, especially on a poll anyway. Do you think that was mainly due to your injury, or do you actually think they thought Phil Baroni was the better fighter that night?
I think, I don't think in people's hearts and on paper, people thought Phil was going to beat me. But, the fans and the way fans react, from the last fight, the general perception is, Frank's a good guy or was a good guy. He did something bad to get out of a fight. He must have done it for some reason. Maybe he can't fight anymore. Maybe he didn't want that fight. Everyone has their own opinion. I think that was the prevailing, what happened to Frank Shamrock going into this fight? Does he still have it left? Because Phil's a killer. And I think that's what brought the edge out on people and gave Phil the edge in the fight. When I did the math, I was like, this is the perfect fight for me. That's why I picked Phil. Phil was the hand-picked opponent. But with the injury, it evened all things out, and it put everything in his favor, in my opinion. If Phil would have kept his cool that night and took me down in the first 20 or 30 seconds, which I had no solution to stop, he would have beat me.
I believe there is some fighters who can sort of talk the fans round to thinking that they're going to win. And if you ever watch Phil Baroni pre-fight, every single interview he does, he's I'm going to smash this guy. There's no way I'm going to lose. He brainwashes you into thinking that he's going to win that fight. There's no way nobody's ever going to beat him. He's like the fucking Terminator. I think that's what it was, Frank, really.
Yeah, well, it's partly that. He talks a great game. When I see this laid out, we're entertainers. We're actors in a play, and the play just happens to be fighting. But everybody gives their piece. Everybody plays their role. Everybody has their character. Some characters you're like, wow, I believe that guy. And some characters you're like, yeah, there's no way that guy's going to win this fight. Phil's that character. That's why I picked him, because he, draws a line and says, here's my line. Fuck you. And that's the guy you need to promote something, because now you know where the line is and everyone can work around it and we don't have to worry about it. He knows his role. That is why Phil and I fought. Not because of how good he was, not because of, we were kind of friends, but that is, at the end of the day, is why we fought. He was a great character, and he challenged me in the play and physically in the game.
Well, you did win the fight via rear naked choke there, Frank. Phil decided he'll rather be put to sleep than tap out to you. Did you expect that from a character like Phil Baroni?
Oh, yeah. Sure. Yeah, because he has no other solution to it. There's no other way. Like, there would have been no other way. I would have gone out. If I had one leg, I would have gone out. Because I know I had to go out. That's just, that was my way. I knew that Phil would have to be dragged out of there, half conscious or knocked out or something.
Well, you did take the Strikeforce middleweight title in the process, not to mention beat a very solid fighter in Phil Baroni, and took some of his best punches as well. Does your fight with Phil Baroni rank as one of your better fights in your career there, Frank?
Most definitely, because what I had to overcome mentally to get in there and compete at the level I still wanted to compete at was the biggest mental test I'd ever done. And it made me grow as a person. And, it's a huge tool in getting to the next level for me as a promoter. And it was everything that I wanted to be, except for all the punches that I took, because my whole head was like mush for probably 2 weeks. You could stick your fingers inches into my head because of the pooled blood from all the punches and the clubs on my melon.
See, people don't see this, because obviously when you get marked for a fight, you're a bit red, you might get a bit of swelling around the eyes, but you sort of see it coming out post-fight press conferences and all that, where they start, bruising up. But I can only imagine what you look like about 2-3 days after the fight, because that's when the real bruising comes out.
Yeah. Oh, it's terrible. I had pitted edema all through my head and forehead, and my eyes were swollen, basically, half closed, and all that swelling and blood and fluid has to go somewhere. I laid in the backyard for probably 3 or 4 days with ice on my face. And they would wake me up and bring me out of the house.
I know you have interviewed Phil Baroni after that fight. Have you and Phil ever discussed your bout among each other?
Kind of. We've never really sat down and, had the talk. Like Incident and NY and I have sat down and had the talk. Tito and I have sat down and had the talk. We never really have. Usually there's some other, matter of business that leads us to that conversation. And, I tried to help Phil and get in his circle and he wasn't interested in it. So we moved on.
Random question before we leave, Frank. You interviewed King Mo right before his bout with Emanuel Newton. You cut into his ring time, apparently.
Yeah.
Is there a particular reason that King Mo was pretty rude towards you there, Frank? Do you think he was just more juiced up for the fight, or do you think he took exception to you and you got knocked out comment you made to him?
I think it was an act. I've known Mo for a long time, and I sat down with him before the interview, and I was real patient. I was like, hey, any way you want to play it, it's whatever you want. I'm gonna come out, kind of tough on you, and this is the statement I'm gonna make. So he's like, all right, cool. So I think it's just part of the show. I thought it was great. It was great. I think Mo needs to define his character, and I'm not sure what that is yet.
Frank, it's been a pleasure discussing this legendary battle with you, and hopefully it brings this battle to light for newer fans so they can check it out somewhere. Is there any new projects you are currently working on that you would like to tell our listeners about?
No, the thing I've been working on lately is trying to save my brother Perry, who's been homeless for about 3 years, and we just found him. He's a homeless veteran. So I've been working with the veterans community locally and nationally, trying to get some support for him and for other folks. So, maybe to my fans, if you have a brother or a sister or somebody, give them a hug, because when you lose them, it's very scary. And if you have anybody who's been in the military in your family, tell them thank you. And if you can find a way to support them, please do so, because fighting for our country has got to be awful scary, and those type of guys should be treated something special.
For sure. To all our listeners, thank you for watching. Be sure to check out our channel, MMA Crypt, for more episodes of MMA Crypt's Fighting Talk.